In India, Kuntal, regarding CFI, you're still affiliated with CFI, I believe, right?
Yes, I am.
And I remember that, you guys were setting up, getting ready for product launch, which I believe you started to do around the time of the AIOS this year, which was probably one of the last physical conferences worldwide. And yet, surely that market, like other markets, has been severely affected. I had heard from one of the top doctors, though, that the Indian government has started to enact regulations whereby they were going to start, I guess, in a regulated manner, telling companies both international and domestically what the markup on products could be, and it sounded like instead of a large amount of markup or whatever markup the company wanted in the past, now it was going to be much lower markups, maybe whatever 20-30% at maximum. And I don't know if that's tied into this pandemic era and just trying to make healthcare more affordable for all eventually. But have you heard any rumblings about how the pandemic might influence this issue going forward, or these government regulations that I mentioned here?
Yeah, so there's been talk about this for quite some time. It sort of started off with stents, and this was an edict that was put down by the government, or a new law around pricing for stents,
Yeah.
for
Glaucoma?
stents for cardiovascular,
Okay.
and there was rumor that it would come into intraocular lenses, but I think they actually are saying with healthcare the way it is, they will not do that because the government is already strapped for supporting the necessary needs of the healthcare environment now, and they
Yeah.
would want patients to be able to have the flexibility of paying out of pocket. So
Wow.
I'm hearing it the opposite, that because there's such strain on the healthcare system in many parts of the world, out-of-pocket pay or out-of-pocket procedures, out-of-pocket paying procedures, like premium IOLs or advanced technology IOLs, are actually going to be exempt from it.
Ah,
I haven't heard of it being because of COVID-19. It would be sort of fast-tracked forward, and there would be some regulation. I've heard it the other way, that because of COVID-19, the governments and healthcare systems around the world are looking for ways in which to enable their healthcare dollars to be spent for care of patients with COVID-19, or managing COVID-19 in the healthcare system, and then allowing patients to make the necessary choices that they have for premium IOLs. That's what I'm hearing from speaking to doctors. What I'm
that,
hearing, though, is that in India,
yeah.
because there's a lockdown, right? So there's a lockdown that is now, it's been extended by a couple of weeks, I think until the first week in May. 1.3 billion people in lockdown is is scary, and ophthalmologists haven't been seeing patients at all. Maybe just emergency cases, retina, glaucoma, maybe cornea if they've had a corneal graft that is having some issues. They're seeing them, but the run of the mill cataract surgery is not done, and so
Yeah.
there's a backlog. And so what I'm hearing is a couple of things. One is that as far as India is concerned, it's going to be a question of how fast doctors get started, and
Uh-huh.
will the government allow ophthalmology, and will ophthalmic procedures be sort of put back because they're not sort of necessary immediately? Are they going to say, hey, patients that have cardiovascular disease, that have maybe other complications or other medical conditions that are of emergent care, those are sort of fast tracked and put forward, and those specialties open up first, and then ophthalmology sort of maybe in the second or third group that comes out. So that's what I'm hearing, and I don't think there's a conclusive idea as to what the government's going to do, or will they just allow it as a free-for-all. I honestly can't see India having an extension, a further extension in their lockdown period. It's really bad for the economy, and I think,
Yeah.
I mean, coming out of this, if we see what's happening in China, it's the first time in, I think, 60 years that China has had a negative growth on a
Mm.
quarter-to-quarter basis. They've never sort of had this sort of negative growth quarter on quarter coming out in 60 years, and that's China.
Mm.
India is going to be in a similar situation if they don't sort of get back to some level of normality.
Yeah. Where does that then leave things like product launch? I mean, again, the timing of it all in terms of with you guys entering the market into India, um, will you still try to move forward with education during this period, a la the webinars, or do you kind of have to just sit back and wait and see how this moves forward? What's sort of the strategy there?
I think we're the strategy is sort of evolving. It's we're trying to I mean, in speaking with our partner there, we've said when things open up again, it'll sort of be a relaunch, right? I mean, we've sort of had the
Yeah.
first step, or the first couple steps have gone in, and then we've had a total stop, and the stop has been for 2 months, and it might not be immediately when the government opens up the Indian economy that ophthalmology restarts.
Right.
So our partner, for example, have kept their reps, and they're educating their reps. We're working with them to advance their knowledge base and educate them so that they're ready when the government does open up the market and ophthalmology starts picking up again. We're trying to work with KOLs and have a cadre of groups or a collective of doctors that we can work with as the sort of the first starter group that restarts the effort.
Yeah.
Zydus is a large company, and they have an excellent sort of continuity in terms of education and online education for their own staff, but they don't have it really ready to go for ophthalmology. And this is the other big issue that we have is infrastructure is not very, very good in India. So you can't have video conferencing calls like you and I are having right now for a very large forum. You can potentially have it where you have 4 or 5 people speaking to each other and then others listening to it. But if you want them to be participatory over video, the bandwidth has an issue. There's, people are living in confined spaces, and you have background noise, and a lot of this stuff is sort of evolving, and we're trying to figure it all out. But as far as Zydus is concerned and CFI is concerned, we're taking it a step at a time. We're understanding what the market needs are. We will understand more as the government opens up the marketplace. They're looking at this as a relaunch now, once things get started. The next big meeting in India is supposed to be the Bombay Ophthalmology Society meeting, BOA. The BOA is supposed to happen, if I'm not mistaken, in July, but that's probably going to be canceled as well at this point. There is no meeting later on in the year. Maybe the meeting in Chennai with Dr. Agarwal takes place sometime in August.
Yep.
That's supposed to be sort of the next one after that. But then between that and the end of the year, all Indian surgeons that have the capability and would want to travel would be considering going to the ESCRS, and that's still up in the air.
Is there going to be enough fear for people to think like, okay, I've got to change everything because of the next coronavirus might be around the corner, or there's still fear of the coronavirus? What is really the primary principle for changing the way practices would work?
I think the big question, Matt, we all in the industry need to ask is, what is going to be the new way of working, and the new way of dealing with patients?
High five.
High five. There won't be hugs and kisses. There won't be, welcome to the clinic and spend lots of chair time, because they wouldn't not do that.
Yeah.
I remember, 5-7 years ago, it was about, if you want to do premium IOLs, you got to increase your chair time. Now, if you want to do premium IOLs, you just don't want to see the patient.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the question is, how are you going to do that? Do you think patients are going to want to come in? Their patients are going to be scared, right? I mean, you're going to have deal with anxiety from patients who are going to say, I really don't want to go to a clinic where I'm sitting next to 5-7 other people in a room. I have to wear a mask. Do I go in there and I'm in the operating room, and the patient and the doctor would be concerned as well? It is a patient, this whole thing about aerosolizing particles.
Yeah.
I was talking to some doctors in the Philippines who were saying they're looking to buy special sort of respirators and face protection so that they can start getting back into seeing patients for elective cases, which is
That's
60.
interesting. Respirators, you're not saying for patients that are recovering, you're saying even for like doctors that are going in to do the surgery?
Sure. There, yeah, today you're just in the past,
Yeah.
2 months ago, we were all you would wear a mask. You would join a doctor in the operating room and see him or her doing a surgery. You'd wear a mask and you'd put a hat on and you put on some scrubs and you'd go in.
Yeah.
Now, they're not going to want industry to be there, first of all. The second thing is doctors and nurses and scrub nurses they would all want to have a special sort of a respirator that they can use so that they don't have to breathe aerosolized particles. There's so much that is going to change in our industry. And, we're all in uncharted territory. So for me to say, this is what's going to happen is really hocus pocus.
Yeah.
We don't really know. What we do know is everybody is going to have to make some level of change in the way they interact with patients. Their operating room environments are going to change. The number of patients that they see will initially be very low because the idea, for example, this is in speaking with some doctors in the industry, was,
Yeah.
hey, are you going to be seeing more normal monofocal? Are you going to do more monofocal, patients for monofocal cataract patients, or are you going to be seeing more on the premium side and doing more elective procedures with premium IOLs? And the answer generally has been, the doctors are saying, I would rather see a monofocal patient because the amount of chair time or the amount of diagnostic workup preoperatively and postoperative managing of the patient is going to be a lot less. So I'm not going to be seeing that. I would prefer to see somebody for a quick few minutes than to see them for an hour or half an hour and speak to them for 10 minutes to convince them of seeing or getting premium IOLs. That's what I'm hearing. Other doctors are saying, well, because they're going to make more money by seeing premium patients, they're going to have to do a whole new setup and their clinics are going to be redone. There was an interesting webinar or a group forum that BMC ran with Dr. Robert Maloney and others in the US, where they were saying they're redoing their entire way of seeing patients and bringing patients through the clinic. The whole process is being redone. They will only do certain types of patients on certain days. Operating theaters will be run, or they would only do surgeries on specific days and times so that they could maximize their amount of time in the operating room. The notion, for example, in many markets, even like in Singapore, where a patient comes in and the patient needs, cataract surgery, and the doctor in private practice will schedule them for the next day, and then for 2 or 3 days might not have another patient, but the following week they will have another patient who comes in and says, oh yeah, you also need cataract surgery, I'll schedule you in. That really won't work because you're going to have very tight, interactions in the operating room as well. So
Right.
things are generally going to change. We're all in uncharted territories, Matt, and
Yeah.
but generally people are saying best practices from all markets, right? Whether you're in Japan, Australia, Europe, Singapore, everybody's going to try and find ways to facilitate seeing patients in the most efficient, in the least demanding environment so that they can be providing the best level of care.
I would think in a country like Singapore, where you have very expensive real estate, that the clinics there may be having some issues because, not being able to pay rent or what have you. And then maybe this reluctance to kind of come in like they used to. How do you think this is going to affect the Singapore clinical market?
Well, I think in private practice, I've already heard that some ophthalmologists have essentially closed down their clinic. They're not even keeping it open
Okay.
until such time, because in order to keep it open, you have to have staff, right? You need to have
Yeah.
somebody there to help the surgeon see the patient. So you can't just have a surgeon opening up a clinic and being the only person there. So I'm told, and I was speaking to some Singaporean surgeons actually last week, a week ago, they were saying, by the way, you should just know that several clinics have shut down. I don't know if they will reopen again because they're not seeing patients. 40%, 40% of those seeing private patients in Singapore were seeing people from abroad, people coming from Malaysia or Indonesia or even Vietnam, coming to
Right.
Singapore to be seen. Those patients are not here anymore.
Uh-huh.
So if 40% of those patients are gone and 60% are then left, then you have all of a sudden, that volume of patients are and
Yeah,
rent is expensive, prohibitively expensive in Singapore.
that's right. So there are these, groups like Singapore National Eye Center. I don't know if Ten Tuck Seng, yes, they do some ophthalmology, but those institutions I imagine would stay, but the private practices may be more affected.
I think so. I think you will get, in Singapore, you saw maybe 5, 7 years ago, a lot of folks went out into private practice, leaving the institutions like
Right.
SMEC and Tan Tock Seng and going out into private practice. If they haven't been successful in really putting themselves and establishing a very strong practice, those that are in private practice, if they're in solo or in a group practice where one or two doctors and they haven't been very, very successful, it's going to be a tough climb.
Right.
Um,
So
because
we now,
they've been closed for 2 months now, right? Or they will have been closed.
yeah.
And so to restart again, you had to pay the rent, you had to pay the people, you got to keep them on board. Otherwise, how are you going to start?
And how about uh, general ophthalmology business in the region? I've heard from other contacts that distributors may suffer quite a bit because they tend to in Asia only keep a couple months of cash flow handy, and so the overhead may be putting a lot of distributors out of business. Is that fair to say? What's your perspective on business and ophthalmology in Asia?
I think there's a couple of things. Folks that are doing consumable business are going to be in a very difficult place uh, because supplies will be limited.
Okay.
Uh, those that are doing capital equipment are going to be in a very difficult place because hospitals and institutions are going to put their dollars where they need to
Hmm.
in things that might not require initially investing in large capital equipment. So capital equipment, equipment-based dealerships or dealers are going to be, distributors are going to be in a difficult place.
Yeah.
Um, I'm hearing different things. I'm hearing infrastructure that needs to be had. Clinics are taking the time to modernize. Several of the clinics I've spoken to in Asia Pacific have said they're going to go into electronic medical records, EMR, in a
Okay.
bigger way. People are also saying telemedicine is going to start picking up, but they don't know. It's like that we in the past would hear about artificial intelligence. Okay, AI is sort of the next wave, but how is it really going to change? We don't know. And
Mm.
now people are saying, oh, telemedicine is going to be the new wave in ophthalmology or in healthcare. Well, how do you see that? And what
Right.
actually is telemedicine going to look like?
Is that like a COVID fad, or is it actually going to offer practical use?
Correct, correct. And I
Yeah.
don't know people, I don't think people know with any certainty right now. For example, I'm talking to some cornea refractive folks who are saying, if I see a LASIK patient, I might be able to do a telemedicine consult post-operatively and not have them come into a clinic until maybe day 7.
Yeah.
And instead of them coming in day 1 or day 2, and then again at day 7, I might just keep them out until day 7 or maybe day 14 when they need to be seen, at that point. So people are starting to look at telemedicine as a way in which they can see um, patients in different ways or try and not bring them into a clinical environment if they don't have to be there.